Alright, hi. My name is Michael Vanderyacht, and this is going to be a video talking about the cardiovascular system, which we'll be using a cat, actually. We don't have a human being lying on the table in front of me, but the cat is very similar to the human and has a lot of crossover, so that's the easiest thing to use. And what we're going to do today is, the first thing we're going to do is talk a little bit about the heart, the structures of the heart, things like that. The cardiovascular system is extremely complex, so it's good to get a good understanding of the structures before you actually dive into the pathways and things like that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go over the different pathways of the heart, how the blood flows through the body, what it's pumped through, things like that, oxygenation, deoxygenation, things like that. And so the last thing we're going to do is talk about the major blood vessels of the cat. There are many more than the ones we'll go over, but these are the major ones and the ones you should really be concerned about when studying anatomy and physiology. So here in front of me, I have a cat. It's been opened up and the organs are visible. So you have the heart right here. You have lungs, you have liver, stomach, the stomach's underneath, intestines, things like that, and then this is the tail down here. So I can come up a little bit so you can see. The first thing I want to talk about is actually the heart. It's important to talk about the heart. There's a couple different structures. The heart is actually made up, the same thing on the cat with as in the human being. There are 4 chambers. There's a right and left atrium, and there's a right and left ventricles. The right ventricle is a little bit on the side up here, and the left ventricle is down here. Use my pointer, maybe it's a little bit easier to see. So the left is actually down here. Right is up here, and then the atriums are up top. They lie kind of up top, right and left. This sort of spongy material, that's the thymus gland. It kind of looks like a fatty glob almost. And then there are two main ones here, two main veins actually. This is the superior vena cava, this big one right here, and then down under here you can just kind of see it is the inferior vena cava. So this is kind of the main structure of the heart. It's pretty loose in here. It's not really attached real thick, so I don't want to pull it out just because I don't want to sever any of the veins or anything like that. So the next thing I want to talk about is the blood pathways of the cat. It's very similar to that of a human, so it's good that we're using a cat because it does cross over in many ways. But when it comes to the cardiovascular system and the blood pathways, there are actually two really main systems that blood pumps through. There's the pulmonary system and there's the systemic system. As you might be aware of, when blood enters the heart, it's actually deoxygenated, as in it doesn't have any oxygen in it. It comes back from the veins. Arteries take blood away from the veins, or excuse me, from the heart, and veins bring it back to the heart. So when the blood comes back to the heart via these 2 major veins, the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, it has no oxygen. And what it does is it enters there, the 2 kind of dump blood into what's called the right atrium, which is one of the chambers of the heart. From the right atrium, it goes into the right ventricle, and from the right ventricle, it comes and it goes into the pulmonary artery. Now, what's interesting about that is arteries, like I just said, carry blood away from the heart. And if it carries blood away from the heart, they usually would have oxygen in it, as it would bring oxygen to the rest of the body. So what's interesting about the pulmonary artery is that it actually carries deoxygenated blood. It's the only artery in the body to do that. It still holds true to its name that it carries blood away from the heart because it actually carries it over to the lungs. And that's where the blood regains its oxygen. So while it does carry blood away from the heart, the pulmonary artery actually carries deoxygenated blood, which is kind of unique to the pulmonary artery. So once it goes through the lungs, it has oxygen added to it, and then it is pumped back to the heart via the pulmonary veins. And the same goes for the pulmonary veins. Veins technically should be carrying deoxygenated blood, when in fact this particular pulmonary vein carries oxygenated blood. So those 2 are a little bit different in the sense that they're kind of opposite of what arteries and veins actually carry. So once it gets back into the heart from the lungs via the pulmonary veins, it enters the left atrium, and from there it's pumped out of the heart. It goes through the aortic arch, which is up top here. It's a little hard to see, but it's up top. And from there it goes into the aorta, which is can be considered one of the most well-known arteries. And then it branches off from the aorta, and it goes to the smaller veins, and it branches into the smaller arteries, and then it branches into the smaller arterioles, and from there it hits the capillaries. The capillaries, once it reaches its target organ, they provide a thin enough outside wall, and they're permeable enough that the oxygen can actually leave the blood and hit the cells and organs that it needs to, as well as any waste that is carried through the blood can be expelled through the capillaries. Now, as soon as you leave the lungs, you hit the systemic system. There's the two main systems we talked about. There's the pulmonary and the systemic. The pulmonary starts from the right atrium and goes through to the lungs, and as soon as you pump out of the lungs back to the heart, you're in the systemic system. So the rest of it's all systemic, back to the heart, out of the aorta, to the rest of the body, and then as soon as you hit the capillaries, you kind of switch back over to the veins. So through the capillaries, you hit the really small veins, which are called the venules. And they branch back into the smaller veins, and then you get to the little bit larger veins, and those veins essentially bring the blood back to the heart. So before it hits the capillaries, it has oxygen in the blood. After it passes through the capillaries, the oxygen has been depleted out of the blood, and it comes back as deoxygenated blood. So that's the major pathway of blood through the body. The two main veins that are really important to know are the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. When they come out of the capillaries and combine back into the veins, the lower body is brought back up to the heart via the inferior vena cava. You can see it there. It's that big blue one that runs all the way up, and that comes all the way back up right to here. There it is, and it hits right, and it dumps right back into the right atrium. So the inferior vena cava supplies the entire lower half of the body and rest of the body, while the superior vena cava, which is this big blue guy right on top, he supplies the head, or I should say returns blood from the head and the neck area. So those are where blood will eventually combine and head back to the heart. So now that you have a basic understanding of the pathway of the blood, I want to just point out some of the major arteries and veins. When it comes to the blood vessels, which includes the arteries and the veins, there's really three main places that we look at. There's the thoracic, which is really anything from the heart and above, this kind of just general area here. And then we have the abdominal, which is, it's hard to see right now, it's covered. It's underneath here, actually, underneath all the organs. And then you have what's called the caudal section, which caudal essentially stands for tail. So that's all these ones down here. This is the left leg, so left thigh, I should say. But what I want to do is I will start up here with the thoracic. The arteries are actually dyed pink when they terminate the cat. They pump a dye through the blood, turns the arteries pink and the veins blue. So anything blue that you see here is in a vein, and anything real pink is an artery. The problem with the arteries is that they can be a little bit more difficult to see because they're a lot smaller than the veins. So the dye doesn't really, it can malfunction a little bit, and so it can be a little trickier to spot these things. But what I'll do is I'll start up here, and as you can see here, this is what they call the aortic arch, and that's where the aorta comes in. And then the aorta pumps it right up here. So you can see it's kind of this white stuff here that runs alongside. Veins and arteries tend to run right next to each other, and they kind of come in pairs. So from the aorta, it runs into what's called the brachiocephalic artery, which you can see right down here, right where the probe is pointing. That's the next big artery that carries blood away from the heart. From there, it splits. You can see the split in the vein, but that's not what we're looking at. There's a split there, and it turns into the left and right subclavian. So that's it kind of extends up here underneath. And then also on the right side, it splits right about here. This vein has actually been severed, but that's okay. So you can kind of see it on top. It kind of splits here. From the right and left subclavian, we move into the common carotid. The common carotid are also two of the most well-known arteries in the body, mainly in the human. Even someone without a medical background has most likely heard of the carotid. They run up to the neck and things like that. So you can see them here. Here's the left, and the right one is over here. It's underneath kind of this big blob here. This is not actually a an artery, believe it or not, but even though it has pink dye. From there, there is a little artery that extends a little bit back. That's the left internal mammary artery, and as well there's an artery that it's easier to see on this side actually. Is the this one is actually the right brachial artery. It's hard to see on this one, but it's kind of buried underneath here. You can just make it out. So those are the major arteries of the thoracic region of the cat. We also have the veins. The veins is you'll tend to find a lot of crossover between the names as well. So this big guy right here, as I said, was the superior vena cava, and then it branches into the well, I didn't say it branches, but it turns into the brachiocephalic vein. And from there, that actually divides, and the two that run parallel to the carotids are the right and left external jugular veins. You can see them here. Here's the big one right here, and the other one runs right up here too. And that connects up here. Up here, you can see these two little veins right here. Those are the right anterior facial vein and the right posterior facial vein. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of lift up the neck. It's going to be a little bit hard to see. There's actually a vein that runs kind of parallel, kind of the way the probe is. It actually connects the two. That's the transverse jugular vein. So that's that. It kind of makes almost an H. It's a little hard to see. You can just see the blue under there. It's buried pretty deep. But so that kind of turns this into an H. You can kind of see how the two sides go up, and then the probe kind of cuts them in half. And like I said, the veins bring the blood back to the heart. And then moving down to the abdominal region, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move some of these organs aside. You can see the veins there. You can see the arteries too. They run parallel to it. So you'll tend to find that they do run parallel with the veins and the arteries. That's normal. But the big one here you can see is this artery right here. You can kind of see it under my probe. That's the abdominal aorta. Not to be confused with the aorta of the heart, but this is the big one right here. And then this big blue guy, that's the inferior vena cava. That one's the one that runs all the way up to the heart. And you can see how I said earlier that the inferior vena cava is blood supply back to the heart from the lower half of the body and the rest of the body. And you can see all the branching arteries as they come back into to the main pipeline, and the main pipeline back to the heart. Right up, this is the spleen right here, this big organ, and underneath that we have the superior and inferior mesenteric veins. They're a little hard to see underneath here. It's a split, and that keeps going down. And this guy right here on the right-hand side of the cat, that's actually the superior mesenteric artery. You can kind of see it branch off a little bit, but it's a little difficult. This vein right here that branches off of the inferior vena cava, that is the adrenolumbar vein, and then the next one down, which is a little bit bigger, that's the renal vein. That goes to the kidneys. You can see here's a kidney right here. You can see the veins. These are renal veins right here, or smaller ones, I should say. So this one goes back to the kidneys, and then you can see a little farther down. There's another one, and that's the internal spermatic vein. And then it continues down. You can see the artery and the vein running right parallel.